Good evening. I'd like to call to order the City Council meeting of Monday, December 16, 2019. And I want to let people know, I see there's a few people standing. We do have room upstairs where there's a very large screen and you can see and hear everything on the TV and have a seat upstairs if you'd like. Otherwise, you're welcome to stay right where you are. But that is available if you like. So please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Okay. Albertson?
Here.
Bueller? Hoyer? Holeen? Lallam? Manti? Rademski?
Here.
Roby?
Here.
Vilhauer?
Here.
Y?
Present.
Thank you.
The first item on the agenda is approval of the consent agenda, and I have one change. We need to remove item E. So is there a motion to approve with that change? Have a motion by Y and a second by Holeen. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Item 2 is public comment. This is the time set aside for anybody to speak about whatever they like, and we do have public hearings coming, but if you're here and would like to speak about another topic, feel free. Please state your name for the record before speaking.
Thank you, Mayor. My name is Skylar Borglum, and I am from Rapid City, South Dakota. I am running for United States Senate. I'm a common sense conservative Republican. I've been making my way around this great state, introducing myself at coffee shops, at Perkins, at city council meetings, because I want people to know they have an option coming up this June 2nd for our primary. My top 3 issues that the nation has, which impacts South Dakota, are number 1, we have to get our federal debt under control. Number 2, the cost and expense of health care needs to be reined in, and we need a much more accessible health care system. And then, of course, number 3 is going to be our immigration. Let's just call it a catastrophe right now. So those are the national issues impacting South Dakota. South Dakota has issues that impact our nation, and these are issues that I'm here to listen to and discuss with and find out what you, in particular in Watertown and Cottington County, would like for me to take to Washington, D.C. So again, my name is Skylar Borglum. I'm running for United States Senate, and I am so glad to be back in Watertown because this is where my dad grew up, and my grandpa brought in Herbergers, and so I have a long history with this lovely town. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak during the public comment period? All right, seeing no one, we'll move on. Item number 3 is approval of the agenda.
So moved.
I have a motion by Vilhauer and a second by Manti. Is there any discussion? See none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Item number 4 is approval of 5-year lease agreement with Clyde Strickerts for the grazing rights on city-owned pasture land. A motion by Y and a second by Lallam. And before we have the public hearing, I would like the city attorney, Matt Roby, to tell us a little bit about this.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This is 160 acres of land that the city owns north of Watertown. We did go out for an RFP to seek those who are interested in leasing the land for grazing rights, and Mr. Strickerts was the only response that we received. He was the previous lessee. He responded with a $55 per acre proposal, and we're proposing to enter into that lease tonight. Councilman Albertson had asked at the previous meeting whether there was a clause that would allow us to get out of the lease should we need the land for flood control purposes, and there is a clause in the lease to that effect. So,
Thank you. All right, I will go ahead and open the public hearing. As if anyone is here to speak about this lease agreement, please step forward. See no one, I will close the public hearing and look for some discussion. Council, do you have any questions or comments? Councilman Vilhauer?
What was the previous lease amount?
$45 per acre.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Y?
With it going up $10, is that the average? Would you consider that a fair price?
You know, I don't know the answer to that. But we just went through the RFP process and took what we received, and that was the only response that we received. So I would defer to anybody else that might have any experience with grazing rights. No, I don't.
All right. Anything else? Councilman Vilhauer?
But this is all pasture land, is that correct?
Correct. It's not cropland.
Anyone else? All right, I'll look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Item 5 is the second reading of Ordinance Number 19-18, establishing a C3 Highway Commercial District zoning designation for the tract of land contiguous to the city of Watertown, South Dakota, known as Dunn Second Edition. And I should say this would be contingent upon annexation if approved. And look for a motion. We have a motion by Lallam. And a second by Manti. And before we get started on this, I know there's a lot of people here that are interested in this topic on both sides of the issue. I want to make it clear that tonight's consideration is simply for the zoning. It doesn't have anything to do with any particular use that might come on this land in the future. This is for C3 zoning. That's the question at hand. There was a public hearing on December 5th at the Plan Commission meeting, and the Plan Commission, after I think 2 or 3 hours of testimony, voted to recommend the zoning of C3 to the council. And then 2 public hearings were held back in the year 2012, one before the Plan Commission, one before the council, and at that time the council did approve the zoning of this land, and it was annexed. And then the owner asked to have that action rescinded. But this has been vetted through a public process in the past once. And so this is kind of rehashing what happened back then. The issue has many proponents, but also many opponents, and the council must act to do what it feels is correct for the community as a whole. And so I'm curious, would you please raise your hand if you plan to speak for or against this tonight? Yeah, okay, about 6. We do have a rather large agenda, and I want everybody that wants to speak to have a chance to speak. So I'm going to limit the testimony to 20 minutes on this item. We'll go back and forth. We'll have a proponent, then we'll have an opponent, then we'll have a proponent until everyone has spoken. Each person may have 3 minutes maximum. You don't have to use it all, but that should be enough time to express your opinion. When 30 seconds are remaining in the 30 minutes, the city attorney is going to hold up a yellow sign that says 30 seconds or less left, just so you know, because I know some people aren't aware, and I don't want to be rude or anything, but we need to stay on schedule. And then if your time limit of 3 minutes has passed, he'll hold up a red one that says time is up. And I'm doing this to save me from having to cut you off. I really don't want to cut anyone off. But if he's holding that sign up, you should end your sentence. But if you keep on talking, you're going to hear this. That means you need to stop. And we need to let someone else talk. Otherwise, this could go on all night, and we don't have all night. So Yes, Councilman Vilhauer?
I've got a question from our standpoint. If we've got a question that we need to address, either an opponent or a proponent, should we wait until after the public hearing and then have them come back up?
Yes,
Versus during
please.
the public hearing? Okay.
Please. So we want to have everyone be able to have time to express themselves. So please don't repeat what others have said, and don't come up for a second time until everyone has at least had a chance to come up once. All speakers will be respected in this council chambers. No cheering, no clapping, no booing will be tolerated. And the council will listen but not deliberate during the testimony. When I close the public hearing, then the council will deliberate and the council can ask people to come back and have some questions. But after the public hearing is closed, I don't want people from the audience to come back up to the microphone and request to be able to speak. That will be only if the council has a question for you. So hopefully this will allow for a smooth public hearing. I know emotions are high. This is an issue that's really important to everyone in here. So thank you for honoring that. And now I would like the Public Works Director, Heath Von Eye, to give us a brief summary.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for those introductory comments as well to help set the table for the discussion. So the planning and zoning staff have been working through this application with the applicant, who is Mr. Robert Drake and Pamela Drake here from Watertown. They have petitioned to annex and zone the property generally located northwest of Lake Kempesca between Highway 20 and North Lake Drive. The said property is approximately 35 acres, which upon annexation is proposed to be zoned C3 Highway Commercial District. The Plan Commission, as you indicated, Mayor, did approve, recommend approval to the City Council of both the annexation by a vote of 7-0 and the C3 zoning by a split vote of 5-2 at their previous meeting. This property, I'll note, was also brought to the Board of Adjustment at that prior Planning Commission meeting for a conditional use permit for a campground. No action was taken at that time as the applicant withdrew that consideration. So as the mayor indicated, there is no consideration before the council on any specific use this evening, but rather just for the general rezone and annexation for the property being proposed to be zoned as C3 Highway Commercial. The urban planner, Brandy Hanton, and myself are here for any questions as staff representatives, and we'd be glad to help facilitate the discussion as it goes.
Okay, we'll get started. And before we get going too far, I want to give the applicant the first opportunity to speak in favor of the application. So I'll go ahead and open the public hearing, and please state your name for the record before you speak.
You bet. Mike Lawrence, I'm working with Bob Drake to help develop this land. We'll have ownership in it as well. I did have a little slideshow that I was going to go through it, but I can't get through it in 3 minutes, so I'm going to try to hit the main points. Can you pull that up? It's under Chrome. All right. Here we go. I'm going to skip some of these slides because I need to have 3 minutes. I'm just going to hit the main points, the 5-2 planning and zoning boards, 5-2 vote, if they voted for that. Compare it to the Dunn and the Walsh land. With the Dolly and the Walsh land, we wouldn't be here today if council hadn't taken that. Changes in zoning also spurs development. It spurs developers to do things. As you can see on that land, it was two-sided on a road. This is sided all three sides. The Dolly land had an R1 an R1 right next to it. This is surrounded. In fact, you can take this road and get to where we would like the input to come in here without ever touching an R1. And this side as well. Cutts Avenue is still a platted roadway on our plat, so you could get to Cutts without touching an R1. let me see here what else we got here. This area has 6 public access points within 1.5 miles. There's over 450 feet of public access points between here and Sailboat Landing, the landing that's by Clark Hansen's. And then there's a city-owned walking path that connects all these. There is a city-owned, maintained, and cleaned restroom on one of these access points. If that wasn't put there for the public to use, and that's the closest access point to this land, this property. You see that on much of the city park, Jackson Park, just that same little porta potty house structure. Traffic was a concern. If that's a concern, it's a concern for everyone, and that the city should take a look at that for anything that would be put on this road. Unmanned campground. Sandy Shores did not have a park ranger last year. Was one thing that I talked to the GFMP about. They have one park ranger that covers 5 counties. He says it's more just to drive by. This campground will have to follow all city ordinances and laws. It can be shut down for common nuisances if it becomes an issue. Those are some things to take into consideration. And I live within 1 mile of here. There are, in this short period, there's a higher concentrations of Airbnb and VRBOs than any other place on the lake. Some of the people in here either own VRBOs or plan to use VRBOs as their homes. These people have these properties have no on-site manager as well. Let me see here. They could build a gas station is something that I hear a lot. There's already a business that's in that location that has sold gas for over 60 years, as well as firearms and liquor. We do not plan on doing any of that. So these people, a lot of the homes that have been purchased between that time have put themselves in an area that sells firearms, guns, and liquor. 30 seconds left. I just think it's really important to compare this to the land that we've already rezoned. We need to look at zoning as a what and where and not a who and where. H2O 2020 visioning process, the Lake Compesca master plan, the new comprehensive land use, all peg this as a commercial spot and land. We have all this opposition, we have all these people who want it, but what do we go back to? Do we go back to the studies that we have? Thank you.
Thank you. If there's someone who would like to speak in opposition to this, please come forward and state your name for the record.
Boy, my name is Doug Austin. I live at 386 North Lake Drive in the summer. You're really putting a hamper on me when you say that an attorney can only speak 3 minutes. But I found a couple of items that were of interest to me. And the first one deals with how it is currently zoned. It is currently zoned as an agricultural area. And much to my surprise, I find that this agricultural area allows campgrounds. In August of this year, the ordinance was amended to include campgrounds as a conditional use under the agricultural area. So it's my position. Were you able to get this on? Have to expand it. Can you increase the size? Well, the two that are circled are campgrounds and recreational facilities, and it shows that they were added on August 10th of this year.
Can you slide that up? Slide your sheet up.
Okay. And so my position is that we do not need the the proponents are proposing a C3 highway commercial district for us, which includes service stations, retail establishments, motels, hotels, motor vehicle sales. And also a conditional, they come without having to ask anybody. Those are permitted uses. And of course, there is a campground, which is number 8. I say that this zoning is not required to allow the Drakes to do what they want to do, which is a campground. That's already a conditional use under agriculture. The city has contracted to the tune of approximately $90,000 for a master plan, and I believe I came in late, but the master plan has already been adopted. Is that correct? Well, I haven't heard the rap yet. Anyway.
Are you waiting for it, Doug?
The city hired people to do this master plan. And at some point, they were told they were to make changes, and that changes were requested and came from the city. Okay.
Thanks, Doug. We will address that. I'll tell you, we'll address that later, so you're not going out hanging. Is there someone else that would like to speak in favor of the zone change to C3?
Rob Peterson, I'm representing the H2O2O committee. I'm not here to speak favorably or unfavorably. I'm here to remind everybody about what we've been through for the last 7-8 years with the H2O2O process. We brought Market Street in to do a big study on what to do with Watertown to help it progress and grow and be vibrant and be better. And we came up with this huge list, and the lake was, I think, number 2 on that list, which was do everything you can to support it, grow it, exploit it in any way you can, right? So I want to remind everybody what we've gone through. We represented 2,200 respondents to a survey in the community about what they wanted, and this was in the top 2. And people want to see the lake developed. They want to see the lake progress in any way that we can. And so I think anything that helps move in that direction, to help the lake progress, to help the lake develop, to help the lake be more vibrant, to be an attractant for the community, for the region, make us a destination, we need to move in that direction. There was a huge response from the community to push for the projects in H2O2O, and the only 2 things that are really left on the docket for those teams was the ice arena and the marina at the lake, and that was a big one. And we haven't gotten there yet, but I'm just here to say anything that we can do to move the lake forward is a good thing. It's a good thing for the community. It's what the community has asked for years. And it's not just how do we make the lake better for the lake people, it's how do we make the lake better for the community and for the region. How do we draw people here, right? We have to develop it. We have to put things around it. We have to use it wisely. So I'm not telling you how to do your job. I'm telling you this is what we've been working on for 8 years. Let's not forget what the community has been asking for.
Thank you. All right, is there someone that would like to speak against the proposal?
So I don't have anything prepped because I wasn't planning on this. But, my name is Beth Schultz, and I live at 398 North Lake Drive. And I don't know that a lot of us are against building up around the lake. I think we just all want to take into consideration that there is a slough on this land, so what are we doing with the wetland situation? Because back in 2012, when we brought this to the attention, that was a big concern. Also safety, you know, there's two busy roads right on each side, and we don't have any plan of access point or anything, so I think we're putting the cart before the horse in the sense that there's no plan. I mean, like everyone said, if we C3 zone this, we could put whatever, they could put whatever on that list there. So just keeping that in mind, if that, you know, aquifer or whatever wetlands over there, what happens with like flooding and all of that kind of thing. So I think that's one of the biggest concerns that we all have. So I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. Someone in favor? Please come to the microphone.
Good evening, Julie Knutson, Director of the Convention and Visitors Bureau. I've been following along with this throughout the time that Mike has been here, and also with the other council for the zoning. And I just want to let everyone know what our office sees as far as requests for Lake Kempesca. I think that the development of that area is, it's something that will eventually happen. There's a demand for it. We get calls in our office all the time. What is there to do at the lake? Where is there to stay? Maybe they don't camp. Maybe they want a cabin. They want a canoe. They want a kayak. They want to, where can we rent things? There is such a demand for everything because people want to come here. They see in our marketing, which we spend many thousands of dollars in different ways to attract people to Watertown, but our lake is definitely one of our largest assets. I did pull a little bit of information from the Game Fish and Parks, and whether it's cabins or whatever it is, that adjacent land to the lake is something that eventually will be developed into something. So, in my opinion, I feel like there's other lakes doing this, and that's where people are going and spending their money. Game Fish and Parks tells us that there is anywhere between 2.4 to 4 people that travel together, and they are going to spend anywhere from $283 to $411 per day in our city if they are going to stay in a lake environment that has outdoor activities such as fishing and swimming and boating. Those are things that we don't collect that data, but Game Fish and Parks did a really nice job of putting some of that together, and those are non-local people. So with developing that, that's just going to bring a little bit more tax revenue into town, give people a reason to stay longer. And so I feel like the Convention and Visitors Bureau obviously the mission is bringing the visitor in and showing them great hospitality and a wonderful time here, and I think that goes with our mission to have those experiences available. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Someone against the C3 zoning?
Oh, I'm Carolyn Hoffman. We live at 374 North Lake Drive. And I'm sorry, but I really don't like the division between the lake people and the city people. We're one community. We're not against the city. We're not trying to make an enclave that doesn't allow anyone on the lake. We're part of this community. I don't oppose encouraging people to use the lake. It's a beautiful lake, and it's underused. I've said this ever since I moved in. We moved from Minnesota, and the lakes there have stuff going on all the time. This lake is quiet, which is nice for a little bit, but it should be enjoyed. Visitors need a good, clear access to the lake that has room for parking and amenities like a dock and a marina, an area to picnic, a swimming beach, safe areas for their kids. Anything that is developed to make use of this lake should be compatible and harmonious with the existing development. You don't put two diverse things adjacent and make everybody happy. I know there aren't many lots on the lake that are empty. Maybe the city could keep track of the little places that come up for sale and buy up some properties and create more park space. It isn't easy, but it does work. I just don't think it's right to take a wet natural drainage area across the street from a residential area and make it commercial. C3 highway commercial leaves it open to too many possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Someone in favor of the zoning?
Chris Shilkin, Watertown Development Company. Try not to repeat the comments. Just speaking from some history in a different city where I was at, where much of the same discussion happened around lake development. A lot of the same issues. And, as you decide to develop the lake commercially and open up that access for people and different things, the town really does come together and rally around the visitors coming, turns it into more of a destination location. And that was really a rallying point for the city we were at as that happened, where they develop a campground, a hotel, and other things around the lake to bring visitors there and expose that great asset that they have. Thank you.
Thank you. Someone against the C3 zoning?
Yeah, I'm William Howard, and I own the land next to this development. And we went from agricultural to C3. What happened to C2, where we build buildings that conform to the houses around? If we do C3, we're going to have metal buildings, shops, boat storage, and whatever they want. But I think if they would zone this C2, then it would be more conforming to the houses and to the farmland around there. And the slough water that they're building the campground on actually drains our farm. If they fill that in at all and they don't conform to the watershed rules, it will back water back up into the 80 that we farm across right west of this property. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Someone in favor of the C3 zoning?
My name's Eric Scott. Mike asked me to share this picture of what they're thinking, a concept of what they're thinking of for their cabins. I think I hit the button. There we go. So this is a concept of what they're thinking of for the cabins, which is a use that's highly in demand, and would also put them in technically a hotel category where they're more than willing to join the bid board and pay the $2 per tax and help with city taxes that way. So Mike asked me to share that, didn't get a chance with his 3 minutes. The other comments that I would have, and you can change that back, but as far as some of the concerns about permitting in wetlands, as a developer, I understand some of these challenges is you have to get certain things to a certain point where it makes sense to take the next step and invest money into a master plan, into hiring engineers to make sure that all things are done properly so that accesses are correct. And I have no doubt that Mike and Bob will do those things. And of course, they're going to be restricted as what they can do as far as wetlands. All of that stuff is controlled, and they'll have to do those things per the law. So I think there are some protections in place for those things if this zoning were to be approved. And then, not trying to reiterate on it, well, maybe I am reiterating, I'll make it quick, but Lake Kampesca is a great asset for our community, and it should be used as an asset for the whole community. We all want the potholes in our roads fixed. We want a clean lake, and all of these efforts take public dollars and public money. So things like this that draw in visitors, dollars from out of town, visitor dollars, spender dollars, spending that don't all come just from our citizens, I think are good things to help us build our community and continue to do great things and help us realize all those visions from the 2020 and start thinking about 2030. So thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak against the C3 zoning proposal?
Good evening. I'm John Roble. I live just to the west of the proposed campground, and I'm probably one of the few boaters that I don't live on Lake Compesca. I have to use the public access. And if any of you people have been to these so-called spots, they're all unimproved. So you aren't going to back your boat in. There is no parking. And I feel the campground we're just throwing a dart, you know. We'll tell everybody that we're building a campground. I think it's going to be either a hotel, motel. You're going to end up with more than just a campground over there. And until they get the next piece of the puzzle, where they actually have a physical presence on Lake Compesca, where it sounds great, where everybody's going to show up. Where are you going to park your boat? Where are you going to park all this stuff? There is no room. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in favor of the C3 zoning? Is there anyone else against?
Right. Yeah, my name's Aaron Hansen. I live at 1082 South Lake Drive, and I'm in favor of the C3 rezoning. And I think my situation's maybe just a little bit different than some, because if you look at my property and you look directly to the south of it, there is a property there that they could be doing a very similar thing there and develop that and put a campground. And initially, I would have concerns too if they were to do that or propose that. I would be concerned about the safety of my children and traffic and some of those same concerns. But I do think all those concerns can be mediated and still have public safety in mind. The reason I would be in favor of it is I do believe we need to increase access to the lake. I think it's very limited. And if you don't live on the lake, I think it can be a challenge. You know, campgrounds are full as they are right now. So anything we can do to help others from in town or from out of town, either way, I think is a definite thing that we need to be looking at. So if it were proposed to do something similar across the street from me to the south, I would support it. And so it would literally be in my backyard or front yard, whichever way you want to look at it, I guess. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else against the proposed C3 zone that wants to speak? Oh, no.
Yes, I am. It was dramatic, though. I caught my foot on my bag.
That was awesome, Winnie.
Thank you. You know, yoga helps. When you fall, you don't break your arm, so this is a good thing. I live at 268 North Lake Drive. My name is Waneen Polly. I'm going to spell that because the last notes had it really wrong. W-A-N-E-E-N, last name Polly, P-O-L-L-Y. I live across from the property that was changed to C3 earlier. And so I've spent a lot of time trying to understand and read and follow since that happened. One of the things I did was I caught up on the very end of the Lake Compesca development planning process. And I saw the draft and heard the speech from the people who are going to present to you today. And when the Planning Commission approved this, and I was at their last meeting, I did not realize, and Doug pointed out to me, that on December 2nd, there had been a change to the plan, and I understand from the mayor that there's going to be some explanation of that after we've all had an opportunity to talk. But those lands that you are now looking at, the first C3 commercial, and this piece of land were designated as green spaces, not to be changed. Now when I look at the map, and Doug has my copy, so I couldn't look at everything, but there's a new designation called C3 or M3. And so lots of changes have taken place, and I'm not sure when that happened. Certainly have a right to make those changes. But I just want people to know here and at home that that was not the intention of the people who made the plan, who were making their best recommendations about land usage. The people who you paid $85,000 for. Of course, you can make your own plans. The other thing that's happening with that, one of their very important recommendations was, how do we look at what happens when we put something up? Right now, the mayor, who I spoke with when this all happened in the beginning, there's no restriction on a C3. The C3 behind the house that I live in, and I grew up not on the lake, but by coming to the lake every weekend and water skiing and pulling a boat out with my mom and dad and going to all the parks. So I understand play. I don't want the lake not to be used. But I do want you to think about what it looks like. Because the Planning Commission has right now in front of it a whole list of recommendations. They're looking at an ordinance that would talk about what kinds of things do we want to say about what properties need to look like so that it is, as many of you talked about, complementary, appropriate for the lake, actually makes it more attractive. Many of the things that we talked about, someone said we want this to be vibrant and attractive. We want to make this a destination. There is nothing in the C3 designations. Thanks, Matt. There's nothing in the C3 designation that would require that. So there's really no need to do this at this moment. The Planning Commission, and soon you, will be looking at what would make any property that's coming up be vibrant, attractive, make this part of a destination and not something that you and I and anybody else on the lake has no control over. As I understand it, this could be tabled and brought up later when you actually have rules, guidelines for what you want to achieve. Thank you, Matt. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak in favor of the C3 zone? Is there anyone else that would like to speak against the C3 zone? All right, I'm going to close the public hearing and, oh, we have one more. Okay.
I'm doing this for Doug because he lost his time. I'm reading from December 14th, Public Opinion, under Campesca. We know there is a demand for the commercial development at the lake, but where do you put it? This is Sarah Karen saying this. We don't really have all the tools. To address that, Karen and city officials have been engaged in discussions about possibly coming up with a commercial zoning designation pertaining to the lake. That would be good for us to have because commercial development at the lake would be different than commercial development that's along the highways and towns, she said. The council will consider whether to adopt the master plan at this meeting.
Thank you. All right, we still have just a couple of minutes if there's someone that would like to speak in favor or against. Please come forward. All right, I'm closing the public hearing. And we'll open this for discussion with the city council. So let's see who made the motion. Oh, Adam. Adam, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. Actually, Chris, if you can step up. Yep. Chris, on your former community that you lived in, you talked about rallying around development and things of that nature. How long did it take for that to kind of take effect on that?
How long did it take to develop?
No, just
to rally.
Well,
so what happened there is they did the same thing, that a visioning process, and actually what that community, Devil's Lake, North Dakota, did was they were begging for commercial development around the lake. So they were out trying to get people to build stuff, build a hotel, build campgrounds, build a marina. And it took a long time, much like it has here, to get those things going. But once it was done in the once that happened, the change in that community of just how it felt about itself, using the lake that was 2 miles away to attract thousands and thousands of people and dollars, really changed that community. So, but it wasn't overnight. It took a little bit of time.
Did you see some of the same challenges that we're seeing?
Yes, I mean, there was road issues going in and out. And in fact, where they built is actually residential all the way up to it, and then once you get to the end, it is commercial. So all the traffic that was going there was one way in, one way out, past residential properties. So a lot of the same concerns, but once they got past that, then, you know, the hardest thing is taking that first step and doing something like that.
On one of the questions I had, and I'm done with you, Chris.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You know, there was talk about it being ag. Now, this currently isn't in city limits. So the ag zoning is under a county ag, not under the city ag. So that may have an effect on that as far as what the zoning would allow in the county versus in the city, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so I know there's different restrictions, and typically, as someone who deals with zoning out in the country, ag is ag. That's what it allows.
I'm not sure if campgrounds are allowed in the ag. Do you know, Heath?
Yes, I do.
In the county?
In the county ag zone, campgrounds are not allowed. They're only allowed in a commercial zone in the county.
Okay.
And it is correct that in the city's ag zone, they are allowed as a commercial use, or excuse, as a conditional use.
Okay. That's all I got.
Thank you. I want to go back to Doug's point that there were numerous drafts that came out, and the zoning designation for this parcel changed. And those of you who know me know that my career has been in public service, and I am passionate about public self-determination for a community via the established public process, of which this is part. Public hearings are really important, and it's very important for people to be able to express their opinion without fear of retaliation or ridicule. And when that happens, as it did tonight, the decision makers who are elected by the community will do what they think is the right thing to do. And I think this is a beautiful, wonderful part of our democracy that I love very much. And we have been going through a public process to create our Lake Campesca Master Plan, and we've had numerous opportunities for the public to participate, and we've had numerous meetings with the steering committee and with the staff. And throughout that process, we've been listening to what people want, and there is a demand for resorts and commercial activity and for campgrounds and for these sort of things, and they're always controversial. So we have to balance that, and we want our Lake Campesca Master Plan to be an accurate representation of what the community as a whole wants for itself, not what any one person wants or any private group wants, but what our community as a whole wants. And I can tell you today as it stands, we have about 30 acres of land which is commercially zoned or high intense use at Lake Campesca. And when the draft of the proposed master plan came out, that was reduced down to about 16 acres. There was a net loss. There were 2 places where additional high impact use, commercial use, was recommended. One was a couple of lots next to the lodge, and the other one is on the west, very southwest part of the lake, across from the storage units. There was a little spot of new commercial development, and those were the only new places. But there were a whole bunch of places where the established zoning, which has already gone through a public process and been vetted, was recommended to be downzoned in that draft. And I don't think that honors the public process. This zoning that we had just approved recently by the sailboat landing was shown as open space when our community just voted to make that commercial. I think that's wrong. I don't think that our master plan should reflect something that, one, doesn't reflect what's already been vetted in a public process, and that without having input from the property owner and recommending that you take your commercially zoned land to open space, I don't think that was the intention of the master plan. We wanted to have the master plan help us to identify locations which would be reasonable for the types of uses that are being requested at our community. And as I said, it's highly controversial. Nobody wants it in their backyard. But the community acknowledges. We did the H2020 visioning process. We've got a lot of requests for activities which you cannot do in a residential zone. You have to have a commercial zone to do those sort of things. So, for instance, to take the land at Stony Point, which was commercial when it was annexed and has been zoned commercial for many, many, many years, and to recommend that to be open space, I think is not an accurate reflection of what this community desires, but that's what it showed on that draft of the master plan. And there's other areas that were in there, about 14 acres of commercially zoned land that were taken from their existing commercial zone and downzoned in the recommendation to either residential or open space. And I don't think that's an accurate reflection of what the community wants. So we asked just to leave the zoning that exists, anything that has gone through a public process with public hearings and action by council, to zone it high density or commercial should stay put. And we're not going to recommend anybody give that up. And so that's essentially what we have in our master plan. Like I said, there's 2 places in that plan which are currently zoned residential that are recommended to be upzoned, and that we left that alone. But then we just simply restored Stony Point, Prairie Hills, the Lodge, the North Shore Restaurant, the other places along North Lake Drive, which have recently gone through a public process, and the city council voted after public hearings and taking input to maintain commercial zoning. I don't think it's accurate to say our community wants that to be open space. So that's why that changed. And it wasn't meant to be sneaky in any way. And it wasn't the staff trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes. You can look at our current zoning map and look at the recommendations. The only places where new commercial is proposed in that master plan are the 2 that I mentioned. The one across from the PUD, which has contractor shops and storage shops on southwest part of the lake, and a little bit more by the Lodge. And really everything else has already been vetted. So we've already been through that exercise, and I don't want to discount that. And whether it's my opinion or not, that has gone through a public process. And so I want to exonerate the staff for any misdeeds. There were none. This staff is trying very hard to have a very open and available process for people to contribute on both sides of every issue. And then it lies in the council's hand to take action after looking at all of the data. And it's a tough call, I can tell you. Every single one of these council members is a little bit stressed tonight thinking about the vote that they have to make. So I want people to be assured there wasn't any funny business going on between the drafts. But what we have tonight is the final draft, and the council will be later on in this meeting voting whether or not to adopt the proposed Lake Campesca master plan. So I hope that answers your question, Doug. Are there other, Councilman Holeen?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I would first address this question to either Heath or Matt. I am in agreement of concern about the wetlands there, but I also know that there are a lot of restrictions, both federal and state, and I would assume also local, about removing, altering, or changing a wetland in any regard. Can you provide me some more clarification on what protections would be for the wetlands if this were to go commercial zone?
Yes, absolutely, Councilman Holing. I would compare this to any other development within a city. If this were annexed and developed, it would have to follow the same development review process. Whether the owner were to propose a campground there or a mini mall, it would follow the same development review process. In that standardized development review process, there are regulations in place for whole gamut of things, parking requirements, public utilities and streets requirements, access requirements. But to get down to the point of your question, there are also requirements related to runoff and drainage and existing conditions on the land that they're developing, including wetland that's been delineated and is currently known as a jurisdictional wetland. Even if it's not a current jurisdictional wetland, there's still protocol to be followed to ensure that they don't have to follow jurisdictional wetland requirements. So one case in point is a frequently visited discussion that we've been having recently. It was on the front page of today's paper, I believe, regarding the Cherry Drive drainage way that goes behind those residents back there. That is a jurisdictional wetland that's been delineated that way by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They are the gatekeepers, if you will, of the regulations that need to be followed when dealing with wetlands. So if the developer were to propose any changes to those current wetlands, it would have to go through the checkoff process at that federal level and ensure that they comply with any requirements that they might have. The Corps of Engineers has a series of checkoffs and things they would require that I can't speak in full detail to, but it is a rigorous vetted process that they look at that, and before even considering or approving any filling of wetlands, if that is ever approved, they're required to be mitigated and reestablished elsewhere. So that's as far as the wetland discussion goes, but there's also the concern for statutes regarding historic flow patterns and not being able to flood out your neighbors by obstructing historic flow patterns. And that's something that was brought up too at the Planning Commission meeting, where there is a channel that runs through here that is of concern, that would have to manage and continually allow historic flows to pass through this property. They can't legally obstruct those flows without accounting for those flows and the management of those flows that used to flow and historically have flowed to and through that property. So generally speaking, those are some of the regulations that would come into play, and in the review process it would be vetted.
Yes, thank you. Councilman Y?
Thank you, Mayor. I think another question for you, Heath. There was a comment about access, and there's some very busy roads all around this property. Again, when it comes down to this, who will make the decision of where the access into this property will be?
Thank you, Councilman White. The decisions on access typically rests on the role of the city engineer and the involved review process. Again, it goes back to that. Depending on the type of development and the plan that's being proposed, the BOA or the Planning Commission can sometimes chime in on those components as well. But generally speaking, it would fall on the administrative role of the city engineer. That being said, when I look at access, when approving them as a city engineer, there are design criteria that are commonly applied nationwide that we look at and make sure that offsets from intersections, spacing between access points, proximity of access across the street, things like that we look at and consider when we approve accesses. Now, at this phase of a development like this, of course, we don't get into the nitty-gritty of the access locations. That does come at the time of development when we have a solid submittal of a plan that's proposed to be built out on that site.
And I have a follow-up question to that, and I don't know if that's for you, Heath, or Mayor, but we will have to, or who will make the decision of when they come to with that final plan of what they're going to do with the property. There will be a decision at the city level of if that will go forward or not?
Right, and if they're requesting the use of something that's a permitted use, it will just be the staff. And if it's a conditional use, it goes to the Board of Adjustment, but none of it will go to the council. Councilman Rudemsky?
You had mentioned earlier that the same piece of property came up in 2012 and it was approved.
Yes.
And then it was rescinded by the owner.
Yes.
Any reason why he wanted that rescinded?
Adam asked me that too. I don't recall. I know there were quite a few wetland regulations that the Corps was working with the previous developer, and I know the developer thought that the Corps was being pretty excessive in all the requirements to preserve the wetland and to have to mitigate the loss of wetland and to put in correctly design things to protect the wetland. And that could have been it. I do not recall, and I don't know if there's anybody here
Is
that.
it the same owner that owns the land today that owned it in
Oh,
2012?
it's a different owner.
Okay.
Yeah, good question though. Councilman Albertson?
I have a question and maybe a couple of comments. And Heath, Dr. Howard had mentioned the water coming from could back up with, what stops that from happening, that the water would be filled, or the land would be filled in so it doesn't back up as opposed to what it does right now?
So specifically, Councilman Albertson, what would come into play is those development plan reviews that I mentioned earlier. One of the components of that is a grading plan. Now, if staff were to receive a grading plan that showed obliteration of a current drainage way or obliteration of a wetland, that would trigger our requirement back on the applicant to, depending on the scenario, to vet what's going on. Now, obliteration of the drainage way specifically, I think would fall back onto state law and any requirements that might be found in state statutes in regards to historic flow patterns and preservation of historic flow patterns. I'm not well versed in the South Dakota water law, but I do know enough just to be dangerous about that topic, and I would defer to the city attorney at that time too to help ensure that we are following what's required by state statute as far as that major drainage way is concerned. I am a little more versed on the wetland component, again, because of my frequent dealings with that as of lately, and know that that is a vetted process that would be thoroughly followed.
Okay, then I would like to just go on to, you mentioned that the Planning Commission went 5 and 2 as far as of C3 designation. I sat on the Planning Commission for many, many years, and it was pretty well decided there on most occasions that we did not put a C3 against a residential for the obvious reasons been mentioned here. We don't know what designation, I mean, we know because Mr. Lawrence has already told us what is planned there, but we don't know what is going to be on a C3 designation, except in this case we do, and it's not, there are a lot of people here that really don't like that, and people have said, well, you know, it's where you live, that's what you don't want in your backyard. Well, I had a lot of people call me and say they thought this was a great idea to put it behind their places. And then I said, well, what about if this were at your place? Oh, no, we wouldn't want that designation of a C3 in their backyard. I think we have to be really cautious before we do that. We have a garage district out at the lake that we spent years on developing. Bruce is on the board at that time. We have a garage district that we have out there, which really makes you build accordingly to the area around you. And, you know, and then there's also just the C3, which really lets you know. If, for instance, this property is sold, right now, these people know what they're getting if this passes. If that property gets sold because they say, you know what, we've decided not to do it, and now we've got a C3 designation out there again, and now it's 37 acres, maybe John Robles right. Maybe it will be hotels, or maybe, you know, we don't know what it's going to be. I think C3 and R is really a dangerous thing to have.
Thank you. Councilman Hoyer?
So I'll give you a little background on Winine's comment about the other zoning. So last time when we passed that C3 that happened before, there was a lot of good faith there, a lot of trust that economically whoever develops that is going to do something that just makes sense next to the lake. It doesn't provide a lot of protections. I mean, you look at Lake Shore, it's the same zoning, right? It's a C3. We've had it there for years. So after that determination passed, I took it upon myself to write just a shell for what that new Lake Compesca zoning would be for development, because there needs to be protection for the lake. You're always looking at what does the silhouette of the lake look like, what goes next to it. We don't want it to be a degradation to the lake. You want it to add to it and make it into a positive thing. Looking at the height of buildings, what is the building made out of? So I took it upon myself, wrote it up, sent it in. This was back in the summer. It's continued to go through the process alongside the Compesca master plan, and it's just come up recently after our city planner took a look at it and actually applied her full education to it, a qualified education to it, to basically come up with a stronger plan for it. As of right now, it's continuing through the process, and it's more fitting to this, and it's very close to being presented. So for me personally, looking at this, I understand where a lot of folks are coming from on C3, because absolutely, in good faith, we could trust that, you know, this is going to be a campground and we might have maybe some storage facilities on it, but there aren't a lot of restrictions for what things look like. And it's not even saying that the developer would make something that was unobtrusive. It's not looking at it like that, because honestly, I think Mr. Lawrence would do a good job with it. It's more so looking at down the road, much like Councilman Albertson brought up, what's going to happen to it someday when it gets either sold off or a catastrophic event happens to somebody, or, you know, we have somebody come in and just make a great offer on it and it potentially gets bought up. So my recommendation at this time, and I'd like to make a motion for it, is that we table this discussion until the first meeting in January, once they've had suitable time to look at that new zoning ordinance that is appropriate to the lake, that actually goes along with the Compesca master plan, which will be talked about a little bit more tonight, and is more conducive to this type of development that still respects our property owners, but still allows appropriate development of the lake.
So your motion is to table until the first meeting in January, and what do you think will change before then?
So right now, looking at the agenda coming ahead, it looks like that'll give us enough time to at least get this other zoning out in the open and looked at, and that'll provide an opportunity for folks more input on it, because he had a little bit on it already, as I understood. But we can have that conversation with the zoning ordinance, so that as we bring more development to the lake, we're not coming back to a big debate every time, and we have those appropriate uses already figured out in this determination, instead of trying to hodgepodge city ordinances on top of something next to one of our most treasured assets in our community.
Right. One of the recommendations of the Lake Compesca master plan is that we develop a commercial zone for the lake and a residential zone for the lake, because there are unique situations at the lake that we don't have in town. And we were in the process of talking about that and doing that before we embarked on the Lake Compesca master plan, and kind of suspended until we got through the master plan process. So maybe it's just a timing
Correct.
issue.
And knowing where it is right now in the process, this isn't something I want to kick down the line, because I think historically we've seen that in the community sometimes, where something's proposed and then it gets just shoved under the rug and then we forget about it. This is something we can put a time limit on, have an actual discussion about, and then decide what we want to do for our community going forward.
Okay, we have a motion to table, and that's not debatable, as I understand. So is, oh, we already have a motion. Yeah, so
Give me a second.
we have to first amend the first one.
Need a second.
No, we had a motion on the zoning originally before the public hearing, Lallam and Manti.
Right, so I'll motion to amend that we table this until the first meeting of January, where we can address this fully with that other zoning in mind.
I'm asking the parliamentarian to
You
say
wouldn't
what
need a
the-
motion to amend.
You
It'd
don't?
just be a motion to postpone. Motion to postpone to a date certain.
Okay.
So whatever date that is.
No more discussion once, do we need a second on that?
I believe you do.
All right, we have a motion by Hoyer and a second by Bueller. Was it Bueller? Okay. To table, and this is not debatable. So we vote on that, right? Sorry, no input. Okay, we have a point of order. State your point.
If in fact this fails, because we would like to hear more discussion from the council, if it fails, then the motion come back again to table?
It could after additional discussion, yeah.
Thank you.
Councilman Helene?
and forgive me, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not debating the proposal. I'm debating what the legality or the procedural is for a tabling motion. A table closes all debate. Now, and a table also does not, you cannot table to a time definite.
Right.
What the motion should be, if you were to, it would be postponed to a certain time. Now that would then, because if you put something on the table, you would then have to come back at a future council meeting, have a motion to take it off the table, and then you could take it off the table, but then you still couldn't debate it that night completely. But there's a lot more restrictions on that. I would say, if it's okay with you, I think what you want is postponed to a certain time.
Absolutely.
I just received
what
a
he meant.
note from our guest parliamentarian educator, happens to be a cousin of mine. He said that discussion is allowed on a motion to postpone.
But not on table?
Motion to table is inappropriate.
Okay, so have we revised our motion to be postponed?
I revised my motion to postpone instead of table, so postpone.
Is your second still valid?
Do you have a date?
For you said the first meeting in
First
January.
meeting in January. January 7th.
Or is it 7? Or 6?
6th? 6, correction.
January
6th.
6th. Okay, there's all kinds of people with scrunchy noses.
Discussion is allowed on a motion to postpone.
Okay. So, Councilman Roby.
Whether it be a business situation or a governmental one, anytime a tough decision comes up, I always step back and look at the process. And I know there's a lot of people that are against this. I've talked to a lot of people that are for it. The thing I look back upon is I thought the process was followed. And the process went through public discussion, a lot of meetings, and it went through the planning commission. The thing I want to stress is that planning commission is there for a reason. Being a council member, we can't know every single issue that's out there. Now, we need to be kept up to date on that, and we have to make the final decision. But when it comes to the planning commission, I put a lot of weight in what those people say because they take the time to get deep into those issues. And that weighs heavily with me. So my point is this: if we're going to postpone this, then a very short period of time is what I could go for that because I realize that a lot of the debate that's going on, but these things tend to drag out. What the motion is to postpone till when?
January 6th.
All right, but I just going to make for the record though, I think we followed our process. And there are times where the process comes out, I don't like the end result, but if I look back and say we followed our process, I can live with it.
Agreed, thank you. Councilman Vilhauer?
I understand where you're coming from, Councilman Hoyer. In fact, I had a dear friend that I got opinions from that suggest the exact same thing that that made the motion for. My concern is, as emotional a subject as this is, following the process that you just alluded to, Councilman Roby, I don't know if in 3 weeks we're going to be in any better position to make a decision on this than we are right now tonight. As painful as it is for all of us involved up here, I'd like to get this addressed one way or the other and be done with it, because I don't think we're going to have that much better information 3 weeks from now than we do tonight. So that's my comments relative to the postponing. I've got some other comments I'd like to make at some point, but that's relative to the postponing.
Councilman Hoyer?
So I see Brandy sitting at the table. Maybe she can talk on it since this is her document as well that she's working on, and she can kind of give an update on it. But I understand that the process happened. I don't know that every person who's contacted us even knew there was another option.
Brandy, do you want to comment on that?
My only comment for coming up here was that I would suggest postponing it until the second meeting in January if you are going to postpone, just because then I plan to bring it as discussion. Now, this isn't on the agenda, but just because of the urgency of it, I can discuss the draft for the Lake Commercial District with the Plan Commission this Thursday, and then potentially be ready to take action on it
although that's not a lot of time either for complete vetting. It has been out there in the public. We discussed it last meeting, so if anyone has any input on that, otherwise, I would think that would be more appropriate to wait until potentially we can take action on it at Plan Commission.
If,
Councilman Lallam has a comment.
I got a question. If we change to have a lake commercial zoning, whatever they would build would have to follow that lake commercial zoning rules and regulations. So even if being that it's December 16th right now, they're not going to be breaking ground to start putting foundations in or anything like that. They would have probably realistically until April, May. So if we're going to change zoning, whatever they would do, unless they literally got the building plan in and got the approval and started in the middle of winter, they're going to have to follow whatever the new zoning regulations are. So whether we change that or not, if it changes in March, they'd have to follow the new zoning at that time. So to postpone it, just to simply try to get this out there, I don't know that it necessarily changes anything. Other than that, they would have to follow the new zoning whenever it goes into effect.
But they would have to rezone then to the lake commercial. So if they came in as C3 at this time, then they wouldn't have to rezone when the new one was implemented.
Could we include that in there? That anything that's at the lake within a certain guideline falls into the new zoning if there's no structures?
No, that land gets a C3 zone. If you adopt a new C lake zone, that doesn't rezone all the lake zones.
Okay.
You have to take those one by one.
Okay.
And we could do that in one action, citing all those different properties. And
That if they were destroyed or something, they would, or if there's nothing currently on there, they would fall under the current zoning?
Matt, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, they would have to seek to be rezoned. They would have to go through the rezoning process. There's nothing we could do at the stage to designate it as a lake zone when it comes into effect, if it comes into effect.
So typically, when we have grandfather use, non-conforming grandfather use, they typically have a different zoning originally, correct? So if they are destroyed, i.e. natural disaster and or fire, somewhere along those lines, they have to fall to new zoning requirements, correct?
Correct, but I guess what the point is that they would still have to follow the new zone. They have to follow a process to rezone that property. You couldn't just automatically rezone the property. So we would probably need their cooperation in some respects. Obviously, the council can override that, but we would need the neighbors' cooperation to rezone that.
To Councilman Lallam's point, and this might be something Matt and I would have to research, but I think along the lines of what you're asking or proposing is, if in the commercial lake zone, we put stipulations in that this zone applies within a certain proximity to the lake and does indeed become retroactive to the other commercially zoned properties that are out there today, I don't know if we can do that legally, but that is something we would have to put into that new adopted zoning ordinance when it's passed, if we were to want to consider that. Because by default, Matt's right, I think that something C3 out there today is going to be C3 out there 5-10 years from now, even after the commercial lake zone is adopted, unless we put stipulations in this adoption of the commercial lake zone, if it's legal to do so.
Yeah, and I guess I was thinking more of like the aesthetically pleasing type of materials used and things of that nature. I mean, that's what I was looking at. I mean, that's some of the conversations people have had is, can you put steel, 30-foot sheets of steel and stuff like that, pole barns, things of that nature. So that's what I was more of a question on.
There's two separate processes. There's creating a zone, which is an ordinance change,
Yep.
and there's rezoning property. Those cannot be done in the same.
It's two separate.
Right.
Okay.
Right. The city did do a mass rezone when the R2A zone was created, and we rezoned a huge number of properties from R2 to R2A in one rezoning action after the R2A was. So all of those were brought in at the same time. It can be done, but it's separate from the creation of the zone. Councilwoman Manti?
I guess I'm working hard here as to follow this process, and I think I'm getting there. If we did indeed postpone this until the end of January, which is what Brandy's looking at, and it has the process through the other entities, planning, zoning, that type of thing, and then we come before this group again for an ordinance change, correct, for the new zoning designation, right?
Right.
What's the definition of a C3 at the lake, correct?
CL.
CL, okay, C Lake zoning. Okay, so we come back, that's an ordinance change, then Mike and Bob come back and they want to do what? Apply for?
They would apply for CL.
Okay.
But C3 is an option for them.
Yeah, okay. So what I'm wondering is, are we going to find ourselves then on the first meeting in February in this room exactly the same way as we are right now? In the sense of there's going to be people who are going to favor, there's going to be people who are still not going to be satisfied with what the CL is, and there's going to be people who will be satisfied with the CL. It's going to go through the same process, which I agree with Don. The process was followed here, so we're going to go through that process again. I'm not saying that anything is wrong or right. I just want people to understand that we could be just simply recreating the entire process we just went through again, to be sitting here at the end of January to do the same thing.
True. Councilman Bueller?
Thank you, Mayor. Beth, I think I might be able to answer that to some degree, and Brandy could probably help out on this a little bit, because you have sort of laid some framework for this, for the permitted uses, you know, and if they basically mirror C3, you're probably right. You know, we're going to be in the same position, but I think the heartburn here for some folks is that the other options in the permitted uses. Now, I do have to ask this question. Why wouldn't this fit in the Ag 1? I know there's a good reason, I'm not sure what that is, but can you help us out with why it wouldn't fit in the Ag 1?
And maybe if you guys
Since
want
it
to
is
call
a
the applicant, I believe that it's just not what he's proposing to do. You know, in the ag zone right now, they can do a campground by conditional use, but I think he was hoping to utilize some of the other pieces that C3 offers that ag doesn't allow.
Could we ask the applicant to step up, please? Hey, Mike.
Remember.
Hey, Bruce. Mike Lawrence.
The question is tonight, is C3 appropriate? And so anything that Mike says about his intentions, he can change his mind the minute he walks out the door, and that's okay. That we're not judging what he's planning to do, we're judging the zone. So, okay.
Right. And
what we're asking for tonight, as far as the C3, is very similar to the property rights that you gave to Walsh Dolly. I sat on the planning board and zoning board for 2 years as well. Worked on the exact thing he's talking about. That was in 2012 to 2014. Everybody up here knows that they sat on the planning board and talked about this too. We've been talking about this for 20 years. There's no guarantee that this is going to be coming. The things that we need in the C3 to build a cabin, a structure that's going to have a solid foundation, in your ordinance is classified as a motel. A building or group of buildings to house motorists or travelers.
And that was one of my that was another question I was going to ask you. The cabins would fit into that category.
Correct, and so would a motel. I agree. I could put up a 30-story motel. 100%.
We've been talking about a campground. That's what.
Yep, 100%. You could do that.
But you know, with
but
Dan,
it doesn't make
I will
sense.
say that you know, I was on the planning commission for quite some time myself, and typically when you zone, you're going to zone what's compatible and you're going to buffer. And I know this is a different animal. And I'm all for development out there, I truly am. But I think a lot of folks are real concerned about the permitted uses, the other permitted uses that could occur on this property once it's sold for C3. That's the thing. And if it fits better, if we can restrict some of that usage with the Lake Commercial District, this is a pretty big deal. And I think if it takes a little more time, just a little bit more time to get this right and make it fit for everybody, I think we're better off doing it. I'm not trying to put it off, Mike, okay? But I think if we've got other opportunities that would I guess disallow some of the other permitted uses that might not be so savory for that property, I think we ought to look at that.
And I believe that because you guys have not came up in the 30 years, 40 years since the lake has been developed, you have not came up with the right tool in the box. That's not on me as a developer. Don't put that on us. We're trying to do a project. We're taking money and we're making something for the community. We're making something there. And all we're asking for is the same property rights that you gave 1 mile away. And they abut in R1. To turn this down is not where and what, it's who and where.
Madam Mayor, I call the question on the original motion.
You can't call the question on the original, because you have to vote on the motion to postpone.
Yes, the question's been called. Can I entertain debate, or
Yes.
Councilman Roby?
I don't disagree with what Bruce said, and I'm thinking along the same lines, except for this. If we're gonna tell them no, let's tell them no. Because what'll happen is we're gonna go develop a commercial lake district, and I get the logic behind it. It's been discussed quite a bit. But if the commercial lake district isn't gonna allow them to do what they wanna do, then tell them no tonight. Don't drag it out another month.
Right, Councilman Hoyer?
Right now, one of the permitted uses on the commercial lake district that's being proposed, which, by the way, real quick, in the past, did we ever get a draft ordinance up and moving through the planning commission?
No.
No, we never did. So we have one going right now. Permitted use, campground's in there. It is a permitted use that's being recommended. However, the other stuff that we do worry about and we are concerned about has some slight restrictions to it. It's no different than the downtown overlay district is. It's just looking after all the other buildings out there to keep them in a aesthetically pleasing look. It still allows the construction of storage buildings, but there's some stipulations on it. It's not just full reign, you can do whatever you want. There's a little bit of control to it. And it's looking out after those needs. C3 to me, when you do something, do it right the first time, rip the Band-Aid off once, and move forward. If we're going to sit here, and I agree a lot with, if we're going to say no tonight, then say no. But if we have the opportunity to do this right, we have a working document that's actually very close to finishing the process. Waiting a month and a half is not that long of time. And if it creates a little extra work, so be it. We're paid to do that work. And we're paid to represent the people of this community and take care of them. So if it looks after them to do that, so be it. But if we're going to do this, let's do it right. I get that we passed the C3 before. That location, a little bit different. It's not exactly the same as this one. There's a lot going on in this property that the other one doesn't have. We still allow, so far, in the presentation of that ordinance, that campground. So it's not saying no to that. And there's still more discussion to be had in there. But I think we need to take it upon ourselves, do the work, and continue forward with this, especially if we're going to adopt the Compesca master plan and take it seriously, because it does recommend doing this in that plan. So maybe we show a little good faith, get the work done, and then proceed forward if we're going to. But that's just me.
I had called the question. I don't think I had a second. Did somebody second that? Did you? Okay, we have a second, so.
You need to vote on the motion to call the question. 2/3 vote closes debate on the motion to postpone.
Okay, I'll do a roll call vote then.
Real quick, before we do this postponement, can we correct
There's
it?
no more debate. I got a second, so.
And Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but what this will do is it just closes the debate upon this.
Yes.
And then we will vote upon your motion to postpone. We can
Correct.
then continue to further talk about
Right.
the whatever happens. I mean, if the motion to postpone passes, we can then talk about that and talk about the bigger issue. This is just closing the debate upon your motion so that we can vote and move on to the next thing.
Correct. I was just trying to get it in line with what Brandy had said.
Moving things along, so roll call vote. The motion is to call the question to postpone the meeting to.
This is a vote.
To.
Closing debate.
Okay, closing the debate about postponing, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, this will close the debate if it passes.
Okay, ready? Albertson.
Yes.
Bueller. Hoyer.
Yes.
Pauline. Lallam. Manti. Rademski.
Yes.
Roby. Billhauer.
Yes.
And Y. So 9-1.
Okay,
Carries.
motion carries. So,
Move to, no more debate. You move to a vote on the motion to postpone, but I think the motion maker may want to clarify his motion.
Correct. I was going
okay.
to amend my motion to align with Brandy's recommendation, because if they can't do it by the 7th, you should align it with finishing it up at the end of the month, since they feel they have the time to review that properly in that time.
so
So,
which
if-
meeting, Brandy?
Madam Mayor, the soonest the planning commission would have further discussion would be this Thursday. The soonest they would be able to take action on a draft ordinance would be the January 9th meeting. And so subsequent to that would be the next council, the second council meeting in January, which is the 21st because of the holiday, I believe.
And that would be the first reading.
The council.
Second reading would be the first meeting of February, then we'd have to wait 20 days for the effectiveness before we could consider the zone. So it'd be March.
Okay. Want to understand that? So that's what, if we postpone it, the new zone, if adopted without any hiccups, would be March.
20 days after the first meeting of February, if my calculation was correct.
So it should be February 28th would be the effective date.
Okay. All right, so
So what's the motion?
the motion is to postpone the meeting. Right now, it's to
Right. No, I
January
understand.
6th.
I'm just kind of agreeing with Councilman Roby's comment there. So, yeah, I mean, right, I don't think I can rescind my motion in the first place, can I? Because, like, right now, that's, right.
We'll vote on the 6th.
Vote on the
January-
6th.
January 6th. So the motion is to postpone action on this item until the first meeting in January, which will be January 6th. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed signify by saying nay.
Okay.
Roll call.
Okay. Here we go. Albertson. What was that? Okay. Bueller. Hoyer.
No.
Holeen. Lallam.
No.
Okay. Manti.
No.
Rademski.
No.
Roby.
No.
Billhauer.
No.
Y.
No.
Okay, so we have 8-2, motion fails.
Motion fails. So we won't, we'll go back to the original motion, which is to approve the C3 zoning designation for this land. Is there any further discussion before we vote on that? Councilman Roby?
Is there, I think we owe these guys an answer. That's why I'm voting the way I am, all right? If we can't turn things quicker than that, we should vote on it tonight. If there's a way to turn it quicker than that, then I think there might be some wiggle room with those of us that are voting to do it now. So if there's not a way to, if it pushes it off till March, that postpones thing, that's 3 months from now. That's my issue.
All right. Any other? Councilman Billhauer?
I had a number of comments I was going to make, but the way this is played out, we need to give the applicant an up or down answer right now and move on with this. Because leaving somebody twisting in the wind, like, no wonder we get the reputation for not being able to get things done here in Watertown when it comes to development. This is a classic example of it. So let's take a vote and move on and see where we go from here.
Thank you. And I will add, we can still move forward and take this to the Plan Commission this week for discussion and move forward just as though we voted to postpone it, and so that we're getting somewhere with it. So, Councilman Helene?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say, I'm in favor of the development on this land. I think it's been marked out in the master plan. I think I've been waiting for a master plan. I would much prefer having this waiting a couple, I mean, I understand that we've waited 10 years or however long. I don't see the problem with waiting another month to get it right with Lakeside Commercial, which is also in the master plan. I'm just torn because I'm in favor of developing this section. I would prefer it being zoned in a way that I would much more prefer, but I do question, even if we were to wait and zone this Lakeside Commercial, if this would change the mind of any opponents. I'm not really sure if it would. So unfortunately, you can't vote, 49% no and 51% yes. But I know that's where I'm kind of at. It's a coin flip for me, and I think for a couple other people here.
Councilman Lallam.
I'll just bring up the same thing that we had when we had the last one that was by the sailboat landing. At a certain point, we have to think that the owners of their land are going to do what's right for them as well as the community. If they are looking to do it as a campground or as cabins or whatever it may be, they're not going to do something that people are not going to come to. I mean, they're not going to make it just an obstruction that people are just like, man, that thing is terrible. Because if they don't come to it, they don't make money, they don't stay in business, they close up, and at that point, then we just have cabins sitting on the middle of land. So that's where I looked at it. It is slightly different, but it's a long Highway 20 on one side. It's a long part of the Lake Drive, and it does have an additional road that goes with it. So that's where I fall into it. Thank you.
Councilman Hoyer.
I'm 100% for that development as well. The CL district to me is most appropriate, and if it was here, that's what I would be voting for. If you gave it 3 months and we get it through, I will 100% say yes to that. I get that we passed the previous C3. That was because this was way off in the future. I just can't. I'm just explaining why I'm voting the way I am, but I can't consciously say yes to this when I can see the solution on the horizon.
All right. Thank you. Councilwoman Manti?
And I also think that the CL will be a good thing to have, but I do also agree that there's nothing to say, again, that in March or whenever it is, we are not going to be sitting in this room doing the same thing, leaving a developer hanging there out in the wind. I agree with Adam. I've said that many times, that people who want to do business here, develop. We've got people who have developed other properties in town. They live here. They have to work here. They're not going to do something where people are going to walk up to them and say, oh, that really was awful what you guys did. And they're going to want to make it successful. And so I also know, if you think about it, I'm just going to make this as sort of an editorial statement. Money follows money. Okay, so we're talking about the way we want to do recreation out there. We want some places for fishing. We want some places for boating and sailboat and whatever. And you've got to get somebody out there to start the process, to put that money out there. And we've seen it with our downtown. The money is following the money. And I believe that in the meantime, we will get those zoning things squared away to where I think, Michael, you assume want them. But I think right now, we have a group that's coming before us, asking us to do something to meet their needs of what they're going to build. And I have confidence because of I understand all the what ifs. But at this point right now, we have a developer who has a project, who's asking us to make a decision. And I believe that we owe it to them to do that one way or the other.
Thank you. I'm going to ask for a vote, and I think it's going to be close, so I'm just going to go straight to a roll call vote. And the motion is to approve the C3 Highway Commercial District zoning designation for the tract of land contiguous to the city, known as Dunn Second Edition.
Mayor, it's also contingent on the annexation.
Yes, and contingent upon the annexation. Thank you for reminding me.
Okay. Albertson.
No.
Bueller. No. Hoyer.
No.
Helene. Aye. Lallam. Aye. Manti. Aye. Rademski.
No.
Roby.
Yes.
Vilhauer.
Yes.
And Y.
Yes.
Okay, 6-4.
Motion carries.
Motion carries.
Thank you. We'll take a really quick 5-minute break.